Welcome to Terra Talks, where we talk about all things real estate. In each episode, we'll tackle current trends and topics of interest, both locally and regionally. However or wherever you decide to tune in, you're not going to want to miss this.
Welcome to Terra Talks. My name is Brian Puckering. Our guest today is an experienced land surveyor, Mr. Rommel Best. Welcome.
Thank you.
How are you?
I'm good.
How are you feeling today?
Today is a good day.
Good.
As every day.
Can you just tell us a little bit about what a land surveyor does?
Land surveyors, well, we're not photographers. That's what everyone seems to think. We're taking photographs when they see a tripod, but we're professionals that measure data on this Earth's surface, spatial data, and we usually then take this data, these measurements, and do calculations to produce maps that lawyers use, topographical surveys that architects and engineers use.
Okay.
And then they do their thing. And in some instances, they then send their designs back to us to go from their design back onto the ground.
Okay.
So we move from the ground to paper and back, essentially. That's how it goes. And also we do a lot of social work.
Okay.
We have to be sociable and in public, and surveying is something to do the surveying, but most of the difficulties arise with people.
The people.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you're out in the field, what kind of tools do you use? What are you looking for? How do you go about getting the land area of a property?
Well, the tools that you choose depends on the survey that has to be done, and that's where the expertise of the surveyor comes in. So, and then once you have the scope of the works, you can then select the equipment that will provide the accuracy necessary to execute the project accurately, so to speak. We use tools to measure angles and distances. We use levels to get differences in elevation. We use satellites to measure stuff on the Earth, and that was the biggest leap for us as surveyors, was the U.S. government creating GPS.
Okay.
Yeah, and those are basically the tools we mostly use. But there are some very specific tools for some very specific cases, especially in construction. We also use drones. The drones we use before, there were just optical drones, but now we have something called LiDAR, where you actually get a measurement being conducted from the drone, and not usually the stereography from before, where you would get the photograph and overlap it to create this 3D stereo effect.
Okay.
But now you actually send out from the drone the LiDAR, and the LiDAR, it's getting so much better too, because before, you have like 2 returns. Now you can go up to 6 and 7 returns, and you can measure from the canopy straight through the grass to the earth.
Oh, wow.
And then also, so those are basically the tools we have at our disposal.
Okay.
And the basic ones like tapes and magnetic locators to hear the iron or the boundary monument when it's under the ground.
Okay.
So, and that one is important because, before you start digging, you like to know if your position is good.
So when you're doing a land surveyor, what do you provide to the client, and how do they use it, or how should they use it?
I would say the surveys for the boundaries and construction and development, mostly the surveys we do. Sometimes you do deformation surveys to see if something is moving with the earth. And surveyors are typically limited to, before we have to introduce calculations, corrections for the curvature of the earth. So smaller projects.
Right.
That's where surveyors are. Once you get to a large project, you usually have to employ a geodesist. Those are the big guys. There's the art and science of the study of the size and shape of the earth and its contents. Yeah. So we come under that.
Okay.
And that's pretty much it.
Okay. So you provide land surveys.
Yes.
Topographical surveys. Are there any other services that you provide in terms of laying out and setting out the properties, things like that?
No, the construction surveys, So how that works is, as I said before, we would go in first, do the topographical survey. The engineers and the architects would get that information.
Right.
The landscapers, everyone gets that topographical survey. And then they do their designs, send that information back to me. And then we typically have to put what they designed on the ground. And we call that setting out, construction surveying. Sometimes it's not for building, it could be for engineering equipment. Like once I did a survey at the cement plant, they were upgrading their plenum. And they had to set a level surface for them to put together this cube, this big metal structure, to make sure that when they elevate it to put it down in the plenum, that it fits snug. Because imagine if you have the surface isn't level, you can't get the cube to form properly. And we also do hydrographic surveys near shore, where you check the undulation of the seafloor.
When you go on a site and you find a boundary mark, or all of the boundary marks, depending on how many there are, what else are you looking for when you're employed to do an updated survey?
I look up, down, I'm just joking. There's a whole list of things that we look for, because you see, when you're transferring property or you're surveying boundaries, you want to make sure there are no encroachments.
Okay.
Right? Or there are no easements being created over your land. Like, for example, you see a water pipe running through the middle of the land, and you have to tell the client, there's a pipe running through your land. If there's an encroachment, we typically look to identify if the nature of the encroachment, how big it is, so we can then create a document. We can document it and then send that off to the attorneys to have it rectified. Some instances, you don't need to do that. It may be de minimis, very small in nature. Doesn't need an attorney, or you might just need to go and speak with your neighbor to make them aware of it.
Right.
And then y'all can try to arrange how to rectify it, but then failing that, you usually will have to get legal representation. But the encroachments, it's funny because all encroachments don't exist on the ground. And for us, we look for visible encroachments, right? So, for example, you might have a situation where a house is built so close to the boundary, it doesn't encroach. However, the overhanging eave does overhang the boundary, encroach over the boundary. And we, it's not a big issue, but let's say the water, it doesn't have a gutter. All the water from their roof will fall onto your property. And these are the things you have to take into consideration when you're doing a survey. Also, a measure of accuracy between what's on the ground and what is in the document, the legal document, the plot. And all these things we have to consider. But for the most part, you just want to make sure there are no encumbrances onto or by the property. No one's structure or anything belongs to another property crosses the line over onto you, or you don't do that to others as well too.
In an instance where you do find an encroachment, what should someone do? Typically,
well, first make the encroacher aware, right?
Okay.
And then also document all communications with your encroached person. So every time you go to talk to them, document it, because you can adversely possess land if no one tells you anything, right? So let's say you see a property, it's been run down for a few years, and then I'll stop there because I'm not going to give anyone any advice on how to
do that.
Yeah, but there are reasons why you don't want to have anyone staying on your property. Right? And you tell them about it, and then you try to get it rectified. And if that doesn't work, talking between neighbors, you then go and get legal representation. They send them a document. The lawyer will send them a document based on our findings. So after we do the survey, we observe the encroachment, then we survey it, document it. If it's very technical, it could be supplemented with a sketch plan, so you can read it and follow on the sketch plan. And then the attorneys usually take over from there.
Okay.
Yeah. if things get too difficult, lawyers start to
Get involved.
start to get involved and throw their ink swords.
Understood. We've seen over the years there are some plans that are very old. You see the color of the paper, and what is the recommended time frame that a new plan should be acquired?
Well, it varies, and sometimes it depends on the attorney. Some people say it's 10 years, others say it's 20. I would say if the measurement system has changed, definitely need a new survey. So if you're looking at something in square feet, right now we're metric, you have to get a new survey. But I would typically advise if a new survey has to be certified based on my findings of a retracement. Let's say you called me to do a retracement just to show you the boundaries. But there were once iron monuments in the ground. Now there are X rocks cut on the rock, the bedrock, and a description change may necessitate an updated survey, or as I said before, any kind of change in the boundaries would necessitate a survey, because sometimes we're not perfect, and you can go to site. The surveyor has all the intentions of doing an accurate job, but something happens,
Right.
and we get there and it doesn't match what is on the legal document. And we have to assess, how long has it been like this?
That's a fair
how
point.
many years have you been occupying this? And then we can say, okay, well, the statute of limitations has passed, 10 years plus one, no one has told you anything, and then we can try to rectify it through maybe doing a survey and having people agree to the new boundaries, or we can have them sign off on them, based on the occupation. And, sometimes it can get tricky. And sometimes it's the usual suspects.
Okay. Understood. High water marks.
Ooh, high water marks, shoreline.
Let's delve into that a little bit. They change ever so often.
Yes.
How often should somebody get their boundaries, especially a beachfront property, get their boundaries checked to see,
I would say when you're transferring, obviously, selling the property, or if you're doing any kind of development.
Okay.
If you can notice accretion, get an updated survey. If you notice erosion,
Get one too.
it depends on what you have to do. But typically, if you're going to sell the property, or if you're going to develop it by the ocean, I would say to get an updated high water mark, because the planners need to know what it is for the application now, not what it was 5 years ago.
Okay. In terms of accretion, there are some areas that have. First, explain accretion, because I don't know that many people may understand or know what accretion is.
Well, that's when the sand or the high water mark extends away from the property out towards the sea.
Right.
So the shoreline moves up,
Okay.
and that's typically what accretion is: sand building up and creating a little barrier from the water coming further in. So you find these things would happen when you have breakwaters.
Right.
Some areas we install a breakwater a mile up the road, a mile further, down is accretion.
Yeah.
And that's how it works. But yeah, and also too with high water marks, you have to be conscious of the wave action.
Right.
So I would not do a high water mark survey on a nice sandy beach if the wave swells are too big or it's too windy, because that would be at a detriment to the client. I would usually wait till a nice calm day. We usually have to look at the ephemerides to figure out when the high tide is during working hours, because it comes at all kinds of times, and then there are different tides as well too. So we try to go to the Lands and Service Department. They usually tell us when we can do the high water mark.
Okay.
And then they send out a representative along with a representative from the Coastal Zone Management Unit to aid us in determining where the high water mark should be. Some high water marks are more difficult because imagine there's not always sand.
Yeah.
Sometimes they're cliff edges. Sometimes they're undercuts to the cliff edge.
Right.
You can't survey the undercut before the drone, so you have to, you know, get the expertise of the people at the Coastal Zone Management Unit to say, okay, well, let us offset it so much from the edge. And, you know, there's various ways of doing it. But when there's sand, there's a wet dry line, because imagine the water comes in as far as it can, and then it recedes. And you can typically see that wet dry line on the sand, and that is mostly what we survey when there's sand. Some areas, there are acquisitions by the Crown. Doesn't matter what happens. There's an installation of a boardwalk. Doesn't matter what happens with the sea, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thinking back to a plot plan, there are several components that always get noted on these plans.
Yes.
Land, verge, carriageway, or road reserve, easements such as gullies or utilities.
Yes.
How does someone looking at a plot plan identify where, without, you know, any knowledge of it, identify where these things begin or stop?
Ooh. Well,
If I'm your typical homeowner or land purchaser, I look at the plan and I may not necessarily know where my road reserve ends, my verge starts, and my land starts.
oh, you mean in relation to on the ground or
On the
just
ground.
document?
Both.
Both?
Yeah.
Well, for me, when you purchase a property, you have to have the marks pointed out
Yeah.
by a land surveyor. And I take that opportunity to explain everything
Okay.
to the purchaser. I usually, you know, firstly, if they're beaming and happy and proud, I congratulate them. And then I give them advice on how to save money so they don't have to call a surveyor every time they need to see a landmark. You know, I tell them things like, you know, periodically, once a month, just go out and put some paint on the marks.
Right.
Over time, you can find it in your sleep. But in regards to the document now, I usually have the document in hand and I point out everything to them.
Okay.
And they say, well, this area, this is called the road reserve line. Can't build your fence beyond this. Show them the marks, show them the lines. And it's important too because, you know, as a landowner, you want to know exactly where the limits of your ownership are. And in terms of easements, oh boy. So an easement is a non-possessory use of the land. Okay. So I can grant you an easement in the form of a right-of-way to have passage over my land. It's very specific in some cases. Over my land to get to your property. And it's typically like that. It's just for someone to not own it, but have access to travel over it, or to install, you know, certain services in specific areas, along with the access to get to those areas. And you have to be very careful when granting easements. You don't want to grant someone an easement now, and then 10 years, 15 years down the road, it can, you know, for lack of better words, mess you up if you want to develop the property further, you know? And in terms of right of way, it's a very simple thing. You don't need to go to town planning to do these things either.
Oh.
Yeah, this is purely legal. Now, if you want to develop the property, right, you have to go to town planning for that. But if you want to grant someone access over an easement, that is typically done with just the attorneys.
Can you take away an easement?
It's a legal document, and I imagine you can. But how? I don't know. You have to talk to the lawyers about that. We just tell people this is how big it is, and this is where it is.
Okay. In terms of the land component on a survey plan is where you typically would build your house.
Yes.
Explain verge. I know there's always this confusion about what you can and cannot do about verge or within the verge and what limitations there are in terms of the verge.
So the verge is, as I said, is an area between the edge of the carriageway and the edge of the road reserve line. The road reserve line is usually described as something from the center line of a road or meters wide.
Okay.
Right? And for me, with those descriptions, you can take it differently, because if I say a road reserve is 8 meters wide, to me, that means the road could fall anywhere within there,
Right.
right? But if I say it's 4 meters from the center line of the road, I have to take the road, the position of the road to compute the road reserve.
Okay.
So, and then the verge is just like, it's not an easement because it's just the area where the utilities are placed.
Okay.
Right? So if you have a brand new development, and the verge is where you will find utility poles, the water, those kind of stuff, and underground cables for the more luxurious ones instead of the poles.
Or a sidewalk.
Or some instances, a sidewalk.
Can I put a fence or a guard wall in the verge, or has to be
No,
beyond the verge?
it has to be on the land side.
Land side.
Yeah, it can be right up, as close as possible to the line. Some people, you're not going to encroach onto anyone.
Right.
It would be more of an infringement or transgression, so to speak. These are the rules. This is the separation of land and verge. Your wall should be here, but if you put it beyond that, you're not affecting anyone else. Maybe the transgression or the infringement, the town planning will get involved and ask you to remove it. Because imagine you're leaving your property and you drive out onto the carriageway or attempt to,
Limited visibility.
and you can't see left or right,
Right.
because the wall is right there, and those are the reasons too that the town planners introduced the verge or the road reserve.
Okay. 300 acres of land.
Ooh, 300
How
acres.
long do you think that would take you to measure? And what would you do in that instance? I mean, we would see a surveyor come out to a residential lot. It's not typically that big. Let's say it's 8,000 square feet. You can see him. But 300 acres is a big site. How would you go about measuring that? Is that drones, or are you walking around in the bush kind of looking for stakes?
Well, it depends on the nature of the survey. So if I'm doing a topographical survey or a boundary survey, 300 acres is a large site, but you have to, before I go to survey it, I have to know the purpose of the survey, and then I can then say, okay, well, if that's what you're using it for, I can determine the accuracy necessary, and then that in turns helps me decide which equipment to use.
Okay.
But nowadays, that's all GPS and drones.
Really?
And where you don't have a view, where the view to the sky is obstructed, you have to use your traditional total station. But the equipment now, the GPS is so accurate. There's so many things in the GPS to make it more efficient as well. For example, now we have IMU sensors in the unit, so you don't have to hold the pole plumb anymore. You just tilt it and take a good measurement still.
Wow.
Yeah, all kinds of stuff. The drones now, there's no more one man going out and taking a measurement by every point, every 5 meters to do a topographical survey. But how I would start that first, as always, get my evidence together. If it's a topographical survey, there's one approach for that. If it's a boundary survey, there's another approach. And you can use a combination of equipment. So you can use a GPS, as I said, where you can see the sky. When you delve into the gullies, you have to use a traditional total station. Right. So it depends. But that would take a while. 300 acres would take a few months.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, you don't know what you're going to
encounter.
Yeah, so you can't say, oh, it's going to go smoothly every day. And then also, too, accessibility to certain parts of the property, you have to take into consideration. How am I going to get down into that gully? I don't have a rope. I have to get a rope. I have to go 2 miles back that way to walk all the way back down in the gully, But I would typically start with the research, go to the area where I know I can find a solid mark to start my survey. If it's a topographical survey, you don't really have to be so much concerned about the boundaries right now. You just take the spot elevations, survey all the man-made and natural features, and then after that, you can go and just compute the measurements you took to produce the map necessary. But 300 acres is huge. That is, like right now I have to I'm doing some work with the BTA. and I have to do with this. It has to do with the slave
Okay, so
thing
you
in
need to.
Newton, yeah.
Okay.
And they have to do 142 acres there. And luckily for me, we have GPS. And it's quite accurate, when the skies are open. And we just have to worry about the areas where we're close to buildings and tree cover and those kind of things. But before, though, like I said, we're talking about back in the day when the guys had tapes and chains.
You'd be out there for a while.
You'd be there for a while, yeah. It would be like an expedition.
Okay.
Yeah.
For anyone interested in getting into land surveying, what would you say they should do? I don't know if there's any school here that provides any training or anything like that, or is it on the job? Is it Trinidad, Jamaica?
I would say before you think about getting into land surveying, make sure you like the outdoors.
Right.
The elements. It's very hot some days. You have to deal with all kinds of stuff. And you have to be very versed at mathematics.
Okay.
You have to have astronomy as well too. That's where you're going to start when you go to Trinidad to study. But you just have to have that kind of, spatial memory. If the better you are at remembering spatial stuff, the better chances you have, at being a land surveyor. I would say here in Barbados, the Barbados Community College offers a course, associate's degree, and then you can go to Trinidad and use St. Augustine campus to do geomatics.
Right.
And they did it with surveying and land information. I know it's called geomatics. And then you can either become a land surveyor after your bachelor's of science, or you can move on into a more specific field and do a master's, or you can do a doctorate. JS as well too. You can become a JS person, a geodesist. You can end up becoming a geodesist from doing land surveying. But just make sure you lick the outsides. You're not afraid of insects or anything gory,
Okay.
and be ready to deal with some strange situations.
Personalities is what you meant?
Yeah. I mean, they're all types, For me, I enjoy talking to people, even if they're belligerent. I enjoy bringing them back to earth. I so like it, And I find most people are just not informed. They don't know what they're talking about.
Right.
And you can't be upset with them, Some of us have the Dunning-Kruger stuff going on in our brains. We hear one thing and we think we know everything, and yeah. But land surveying is not for everyone. I like it.
Okay.
A lot.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Rommel Best, land surveyor. Thank you again. My name is Brian Puckern from Terra Caribbean.